I was debating what to speak about today. I was thinking and mulling stuff over, but I actually had a person leave a comment that has inspired this production. Now, a few days ago during the midterms, we had the Arizona Senate race between these two candidates. There was a Green Party candidate who dropped out, endorsed a Democrat. And my criticism of the Democrat was that they voted with Trump 62% of the time, or rather 59% of the time when I initially said that. It turns out it's at this point it's actually a couple of points higher. But the bottom line was that we have all of these liberals who call themselves being the resistance to Trump, being against his policies and ideas. And so as the person you've chose to run for your opposition party is voting with the opposition most of the time, I thought that was not, that didn't make much sense to me. But there was a user who said, in response to me bringing up this fact that was tracked by 538, that I was either incompetent or just plain uninformed to have the fact that this candidate, this Democratic candidate, votes with the Republican for the most part, just like the Republican votes with the Republican president for the most part, and that was incompetent or uninformed to bring that up. Now, this race is very interesting because it's still being counted, and her margin is increasing as time passes. But there was a Green Party candidate whose name I believe was Angela Green, and she had dropped out a couple of days before the cycle was over and endorsed the Democrat, and had been met with much anger on social media for presumably stealing the vote from the Democrat, from getting people who supposedly were going to back the Democrat to vote for her instead, and they called it a waste of one's vote, and it was reminding me of the criticism I've seen of people who chose not to vote for Hillary Clinton during the presidential election 2 years ago. They go after non-voters or people that voted third party, and they say, "You're the reason we have Trump. You're the reason we have him." And one of the quick retorts, other than just saying, you don't know for fact if the people who voted for the third parties or didn't vote at all were just now going to be motivated to switch over and vote for one of those two if they knew what would happen now. But one of the criticisms of that criticism is that it assumes the people who are choosing not to vote for either candidate are obligated to vote for one of them. And as I've said before, when you have candidates who have a majority of positions or a very large number of positions in line with each other, what is the difference? And so it was, and again, in this person's opinion, incompetent or just plain uninformed to say that a Democrat who votes with Trump a majority of the time as a member of the House, who has said that Joe Manchin, the sole Democrat that voted for Kavanaugh, the man that all these women hated for so long, would vote with the Republicans upon entering the Senate. But it is not either incompetent or just plain uninformed to think that if the Green Party candidate wasn't there, or if the other people weren't there, this Democrat would have even more votes. That makes sense. But it's this really does show the futility of the comment section, where you have people who don't let their brains go to work in terms of thinking things. You see, a lot of times when someone sees a title, they will respond back to that. And I get that we're in a rush to say something before and then get out of there. That's fine. But this is someone actually heard what I had to say and reduced the logic in it, which again is backed by a fact, and told me that it was just a bunch of things I was randomly saying. It's telling when you have people who have put their faith in a group of individuals that financially benefit from being in these positions, and who are willing to change their views at the drop of a hat in order to get elected as their saviors. One of the reasons I talked about the military budget, 717 billion, over and over again was because I said to myself, wait a second, if the resistance, the Democrats think that Trump is so evil, that he is causing all of these horrible bad things to happen, that he is, espousing the wrong positions both on domestic and foreign affairs, why would they give him a budget of 700 billion to launch into all these different wars and or keep them going and mess them up further? So then when you get to the issue of the defense contractors, oh, that makes sense. That's why that's happening. And certainly you have these people who've created a scenario where they turn their brains off from logically thinking about, because see, I've said this before. I've realized a good chunk of people are not my kind of voters. I've had two individuals I've spoken with about politics, both for at least over a year now, and they're neither are engaged in this stuff as much as I am by their own admission. They don't, sit up here and read articles just for the heck of it and look up this stuff. But one thing they will do, and one thing I'll always give them credit for, is if you present a series of facts to them about a candidate, a race, an election, they will adhere to those facts. They don't identify with either party. They are what I would consider to be true independents. You can make a case, and then they will adapt their views based off of the evidence presented forward. This kind of thinking is very dangerous because it says to you, I don't care what the facts are. I don't care what all that person is allowing to happen and saying on the other hand. So while Sinema, the Democrat, might say, I'm opposed to Trump and I don't like him and blah, 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 if she's voting with him 62% of the time, a majority of his stuff she must like. But again, these people do not allow themselves to leave the atmosphere of believing in the Democrats as some saviors in exchange for looking at policies. I've always said I don't consider myself to be a member of either party. I want people to look at candidates and determine which is good and which is bad based off of their stances on the issue. If you gave me a Democrat that voted with Trump 0% of the time or 5 or 6, we'd be having a completely different discussion. Especially if they're running against a Republican like McSally, who's just being a bobblehead over and over. And look, you can then morph the argument into being, you're opposed to the person who isn't just a bobblehead, who votes with the majority of the time, but it's a slim majority. Well, again, we're talking from the perspective of people who don't like Trump, which is what this person that you can assume would be if they're so offended by the criticism of Sinema. So do you see how it becomes the lesser of two evils? You consider Trump and his positions to be evil. Thereby, you consider anyone who votes with him to be evil. So if you have one person who votes a slightly less than the other person, but still a majority of the time, they are the lesser of two evils. And we're doubling down on that. We don't run people who are anti-war or want to get Citizens United overturned via a constitutional amendment. We just keep picking the neoliberals. And by the way, it's kind of funny when you start factoring it. Like, just think about this. I want you to really think about this. Sinema is people are saying her votes were taken by the Green Party candidate. Guess how Sinema got her start? Working for the campaign of Green Party presidential candidate Ralph Nader, and claiming to be a progressive, and then getting in office and turning into a, more than half the time voting with Trump person. So she's a fraud. Is that an endorsement of McSally? No. I sincerely hope that when McCain's seat is up in 2 years in Arizona, the Democrats will pick someone who is progressive and or at least is against these wars, against that border wall, against all of the other things that I expect the Republican to be in favor of. And I won't bemoan the Republican for being in favor of those things. You know why? Because then you will have a difference in who you vote for. It will actually matter. You will have one be the complete polar opposite of the other. That's how it should be. But hey, I get it. People are going to keep having their heads in their behinds like this individual. And 100 million people are going to sit at home and not vote, and I don't blame them when they're given these kind of options. It is completely understandable, and I just hope that people will look at candidates individually, whether they're Democrat or Republican, determine if they appeal to them with the majority of those issues, and then pick whoever they like. That's how these things should work. Not, you didn't vote for the Democrat. You're either incompetent or just plain uninformed. What does that even mean? I just told you the facts relating to their record. So the bizarro world just continues over and over. The Twilight Zone is here to stay.